Mereceu privilégio. Sana apedza kutaura handina madamu mai ndii ndinotobika mai like sondori nejana riri kwandiri saka unoziva varume mazinonoka kumuka nzvimbo dzekubika saka unozongoona kuti iyanopuwawo graft iyanopuwawo graft saka zvakavharana obvious unoziva pamurume ka it's not a mistake inenge yakuitawo challenge semapuraizi paunononoka bebeanza mudelay uendere vatsvangi masana vatsvangi atinoda kuitirwa kwacho manje ukoko
But Jamaica.
Okay, so do you plan to know when it's finished?
To you all, I want to welcome you to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, and as I do that, I want to recognize my principals which are here on the top table in front of you. It is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to recognize the Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Mr. George Guamatanga. We have here, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Ncube. We have invited you members of the press to this occasion, and I'll ask the permanent secretary to introduce the subject matter. But suffice to say that we are glad that you are here at short notice. Apologies for this delay, but we are glad that this event is taking place. With that, I want to call on MSEC, please, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, our sincere apologies for the late start. I think we will in future work to ensure that the government has been working on a transitional stabilization program which will guide policy and reforms over the period October 2018 up to December 2020. Today we intend to disseminate that document to the market, and that's why we have invited you here. But I think to do that, may I then call upon the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Ncube, to present the Transitional Stabilisation Program. Minister, over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Guvamatanga. Good morning, colleagues. Welcome again to Treasury this morning. And thank you for joining us and for being patient with us. Actually, we're waiting for some of you to come in. So it was on both sides of the equation. but here we are. Basically, I don't know if they've got copies already or not. This is the document, the Transitional Stabilization Program document. That is the summary, is the abridged version. Then we have the big one here, Hurriyat, which is the full document, which is 300 odd pages. But I suspect you'd want to read the abbreviated version for speed and to get through it very quickly. But there's a lot of detail in here. Let me hasten to say that His Excellency has already launched Vision 2030 in terms of articulating that Zimbabwe is desirous, and he's desirous to make sure that Zimbabwe becomes a middle-income country by year 2030. There'll be an opportunity, a formal opportunity for him in the not-so-distant future to officially launch Vision 2030, to launch the Transitional Stabilization Program, and today's event is really dissemination of the program after the approval by Cabinet on Tuesday this week. So Vision 2030 basically, as I said, focuses on moving Zimbabwe to a middle-income country by year 2030. I think the choice of year 2030 is not surprising, given our focus on sustainable development goals. Things have to also dovetail in terms of timeline with global norms and programs such as the SDG program. So this stabilization program is really nothing other than a policy implementation program for implementing Vision 2030. That's what it is. It is more granular, more specific, more precise, but also there will be more precision as we go along, because each government department or related institution, which may not be governmental but quasi, has to produce a detailed plan on how they'll achieve their targets. And these targets will be monitored through a results-based framework and so forth. So you almost expect like 3 layers of implementation. So there's the overall vision, which His Excellency has already pronounced on. Today we are disseminating the Transitional Stabilization Program, which is the implementation program, and then there will be further deepening at department by department level, and then we'll rigorously monitor our progress. Next slide, please. So just for the record, go back one slide. Go back one slide. Yes. So in terms of my presentation, what I'll do, I'll outline the main focus of the program, the TSP program, if we can all adopt that lingua franca going forward, TSP, Transitional Stabilization Program. So I'll focus on the institutional reforms and dealing with imbalances, the macroeconomic reforms and the balances thereof, productive sector reforms, reforms in the services sector, and investing in infrastructure. And then number 6, human development reforms, governance reforms, and then the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation based on the results-based framework. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, just to remind you, the Vision 2030 has several pillars. I would say 5 key pillars. 1 is to deal with governance reforms. Number 2 is macroeconomic stability, which I'll spend time on, and the overall international re-engagement. Number 3 is inclusive growth as a broad agenda. Number 4, infrastructure, including inclusive infrastructure. And finally, social development. And a lot of this then speaks to the SDG agenda, which I've articulated before, which also has the same timeline of up to 2030. So the objectives of Vision 2030 and values, for what is worth, is obviously improve governance at the risk of repeating, is to make sure that we open up the democratic space and upholding the freedoms of expression and association, peace and national unity, respect for human and property rights, and then the attainment of responsive public institutions, and then broad-based citizenship participation and socioeconomic development programs. Political and economic re-engagement, as I've said, with the global community, and then the creation of a competitive and friendly business environment. After all, Zimbabwe is open for business, so we're going to walk the talk on this occasion. You heard on Tuesday that we have approved the principles for the bill that is going to launch ZIDA, our one-stop investment stop. We mean business. It is our intention to make sure that the bill is tabled and approved in the shortest possible time. We are going to aggressively fight all forms of corruption, but also make sure that we enhance both domestic and foreign investment. And I also emphasize domestic because it's quite easy to fall into the trap of focusing on FDI. I always say that we also need to focus on DDI, direct domestic investment. Foreign investors want to know that they've got partners locally that they can work with, and we support those domestic investors. So it's very important for us to do both DDI and FDI. Next slide, please. I've talked about the upper middle income aspiration. So the next slide, please. So on the macroeconomic imbalances and dealing with those in terms of reforms, we want to make sure that we re-establish macroeconomic balances, restore fiscal balances, and get rid of the disequilibrium that we currently are experiencing, and make sure that we mobilize domestic savings, but also make sure that our exports improve their competitiveness. Just looking at the macroeconomic issues. So our first order of business is to restore fiscal balance or eliminate fiscal disequilibrium. What I have there is a chart showing how our overall fiscal deficit has grown. Our prognosis is that it will be double digit at the end of the year, but we're determined to bring it down to single digit as quickly as possible. So making sure that that deficit shrink is very important through tax expansion measures to increase the tax base, which is what I did on Monday in terms of the announcement we made in terms of fiscal reforms, but also cost containment measures, which I'll outline later. We need both of these to work together to reduce this budget deficit. Efficiency measures for resource deployment within government, and he's got very good ideas on making sure that we deal with that. I'll give you an example. If we were to paint this room, he was reminding me that if we were to paint this room yourself, it's going to cost you $400. But if we were to do some procurement and so forth as government for the same job, it would be $4,000. What's going on? So just something as simple as that it just be focusing on efficiency is part of what we're going to be doing in the ministry to make sure that we shrink the budget deficit. The deficit, as I've always said, also could be an albatross on future monetary policy development, so we're determined to make sure that it shrinks. Next slide, please. Part of it involves reducing the issuance of treasury bills. Here I'm repeating what I've announced earlier, which is that we look at other forms of supporting socio-economic development by crowding in the private sector through instruments such as guarantees to financial institutions, for example, making sure that the private sector takes a lead in driving some of our programs. But also making sure that in issuing these treasury bills, we follow the process that is laid down in terms of procedure. And secondly, the pricing is fair. So making sure that these treasury bills are subjected to a market-based approach, such as auctions and so forth, will clearly reduce the cost of treasury bills in terms of interest rate by as much as 300 basis points or 3%. That is our prognosis. Next slide, please. As I said, we'll plug leakages, we'll deal with corruption at the ports and our entry borders, at the exit points. We'll deal with tax evasion and tax avoidance, or smuggling, money laundering, just unethical procurement practices. I gave the example of painting this room. You know, you just don't know what's going on when you see a difference from 400 to 4,000, as an example. But we have to be tough on controlling expenditure. Now, on domestic savings, to make sure that there's an efficient mobilization and allocation of resources. Naturally, we promote economic diversification. There's shared and sustained growth, and also we deal with poverty alleviation. As you know, that we're moving towards a decentralized model as government, as a country, in terms of the constitution, the devolution agenda. So naturally, we will be tracking rigorously poverty levels, province by province, district by district, because that will help us allocate resources to those areas. But of course, we'll put in place a public financial management system that will follow the money to make sure that at district level, there's a proper management of resources. But we need to know that we're having an impact, what is the need, and poverty levels are a good indicator of the need down there. There are many ways to measure it. We could use a multidimensional measure of poverty, but it will be a guiding principle in terms of resource allocation all the way down to district and provinces. Looking at the financial sector development, naturally, given my background, I'm passionate about financial sector development, making sure that access to capital improves. Yesterday, I had a listening session, one of my listening roadshows with the SME sector. They are very clear. Some of the clearest groups in terms of a group is the SME sector. Why? Because it's family money that is at play. They're not raising anyone else's resources, or you making use of those. They know what they're doing. And they've said, look, Minister, the issue is access to capital and infrastructure that supports our business. Those are, and then also registration, formalization, all those things where we create impediments for them. But access to capital here means dealing with the collateral issues. When they borrow money, banks are still requiring that they offer collateral. That's what banks do, you know. But are there other more creative ways of doing it? Perhaps insurance companies should come in and start offering insurance on loans, and that becomes acceptable collateral for banks. The other is fast-tracking our registry for collateral, for movable collateral. So not just immovable, but also movable collateral is accepted. So just dealing with access to capital for the SME sector, deepening capital markets. I've talked about infrastructure bonds before. That we should do. This is the only way to make sure that the financial sector plays its role in terms of financial intermediation. Next slide, please. Our exports need to be competitive. We need to grow our exports, whether in terms of supporting the export sector, the mining sector, agriculture, tourism, as well as the forex earner needs to be supported. We're going to do that, but also making sure that over time the exchange rate measures and currency measures also are supportive to exports. I'll now move on to institutional reforms, which is the second set of reforms. Here we're looking at more precise budget expenditure control measures, reform of the civil service, public enterprise and local authority service delivery, making sure that is improved, empowerment of provinces under the devolution agenda, reducing rent-seeking and corrupt behaviors, this is a bit of a repeat, and the ease of doing business, and making sure that obviously we re-engage globally, starting with our arrears clearance, and just focusing on doing the ease of business. I'm actually aware that our licensing requirement is very onerous. A businessman came to see me 2 days ago. He will remain unmentioned, but he had a choice of either investing in a country, in a neighboring country again, which will remain unnamed, or investing here. He was told here in Zimbabwe he will need 23 licenses to do their business. In the neighboring country, he only needed 1 license. And guess what he did? He went to the neighboring country, and he subsequently invested here, but it took much, much longer. Something as simple as that, just dealing with the licensing requirement is one way to improving the ease of doing business environment. I'm delighted that this one-stop shop is coming on board, so we'll be able to deal with these issues. Looking at, again, as I talked about expenditure control, the wage bill and so forth on the government front, obviously we have to first of all do something about the pension system for the public service. We're working on introducing a formal pension system, whether it's defined contribution or defined benefits. We'll evaluate and see what works best, and move away from pay-as-you-go system. So the nice thing about a pension system, just like our neighbors have, is that then you start building savings. I was talking earlier about deepening savings and so forth, mobilizing savings. That contributes to that. So working on this sort of over time, we grow the pension fund while we reduce the burden on the pay-as-you-go system. We'll review the treasury subventions to make sure that, again, we manage those outlays and those expenditures. We're working at right-sizing the public sector employment in terms of numbers, but also in terms of the skills mix, working with, obviously, the chairman of the Public Service Commission and other relevant departments within government. And then the wage bill management will also be dealt with. And then also containing the budget for travel expenditure. We have a few leakages there that we're going to plug. What we do with our foreign service missions so that they're effective, giving them maximum support, but also making sure that where there's need to consolidate, that is also all done. We want to review the parliamentary sitting allowances so as to make our parliament more effective as an oversight body, as an oversight on the executive, which is ourselves. That is very important. And of course, making sure that whatever they need to play that oversight, the committees, parliament itself, they're well catered for to be able to do what they do. Next slide, please. On state-owned enterprises or parastatals, we've done a lot of work already in classifying them into various categories. So those that can be privatized or can be transformed in one way or the other, those that can be merged or demerged, and those that could be liquidated, which are no longer required. And those that can be maybe subsumed into existing ministries. We have categorized them in that way, and we'll be able to roll out that plan. The agency here is working on those that are privatizable. So, for instance, an SOE such as POSB, they're going full steam ahead with privatization. And certainly also Tel1, Net1, the same should happen. Here I'm just mentioning a few that we should not hesitate to move with speed in the next 6 months so that we're able to get results and get suitors to be partners to these institutions. And in that privatization, I'm insisting that we must advertise globally on all these transactions, globally, the US, UK, Japan, wherever, to make sure that we get the best partners out there, and then we get the FDI, foreign direct investment, that we so require, and the best technology and you know, ways of managing for these parastatals, for them to be better companies. It is not enough just to advertise in the local media. In my view, we should go global on this. Then on local authorities, we have to improve service delivery. Absolutely. I would like to see that we develop a metrics for even rating the quality of service delivery, province by province, authority by authority. It can be done. Other countries are already doing it. Again, sitting in this position, I don't want to name other countries. I know them well. And in my previous life, I used to teach on it, to say, oh, this country is doing well on this. We know how to design these to make sure that service delivery improves, but also make sure that there's necessary training for our officials at that level to be able to offer service delivery, to reduce teacher absenteeism, to reduce health sector workers' absenteeism, for example. I'm now going to move on to the productive sector reforms. Our productive sector here is just to make sure that these policies are able to focus on the sectors that give us the biggest bang for the buck. We eliminate all the arbitrary policy reversals that may exist, contradictory policies for each sector that work against each other with clarity, and we streamline the policies that impact on the various sectors. So next slide, please. What we know so far is that the key sectors will be agriculture, mining, construction, obviously manufacturing. But you can see where we're getting the most payoff in terms of policy impact, the agriculture, construction. So just doing a lot more in those sectors is going to show up our growth prospects towards that 6% that we're targeting, which is above the current prognosis of about 4.2%. So really we want, going forward, using a simple phrase, smart agriculture. So we grow our exports, we improve productivity, we improve property rights within the sector, and begin to export. So far, so good in terms of presidential import scheme, command agriculture. All those have made sure that there is food security. Our strategic reserves are there, but of course we're wary of El Nino. We know that, and I think we will do as much as possible to risk manage that potential weather impact. But moving to that smart agriculture going forward is what will deliver sustainability in a key sector of the economy on which at least 60% of Zimbabweans live on. What I have there is detail on the various crops and so forth, where that on the tobacco sector we're doing very well, and cotton, in a variety of sectors, without going into detail, but we could do more on some of our cereals such as wheat and so forth, soybeans, where we keep importing those crops. We could do more in producing everything locally. Absolutely. And soybeans are also exportable. So if you're investing in exportable like that, you just produce enough for domestic consumption. Any excess can be exported to other countries, and we earn foreign currency. The mining sector, at the risk of repeating, is a key sector. One area is that of exploration, that investing in exploration will go a long way in supporting this sector. Zimbabwe is underexplored for the vast minerals that we kind of know are underground and below the surface. So just spending more money on exploration, we're figuring out ways on how to support this initiative. I have there various figures on our prognosis for output as we go forward. You can see where they're looking at platinum, gold. Gold output this year was at record levels, and I'm aware that there are so many of you involved in gold mining as SMEs micro entrepreneurs. Keep going. We like that. And what we've been trying to figure out with the Minister of Mines is how we can support you as small to medium scale miners who are so productive, whether it's acquiring equipment and so forth. We'll look at ways to support you in doing that. But again, we have great potential in this sector. Industry is again supporting retooling. This is a sector that I know well. I'm in my spare time. I'm a small industrialist. I own a factory in the chemical sector. I know the issues that equipment. Even for my factory, the equipment is old. So even I have to retool like everyone else, so that we can improve job creation, productivity goes up. Of course, there are issues around importation and forex. But once productivity is up and we're able to export and end the forex with the FCA accounts that have been allowed to open now, that will go a long way in dealing with the access to foreign currency. But also in the manufacturing sector, we have to embrace technology. We have to embrace robotics. Absolutely. That will create a new type of jobs, and not the old jobs, but we cannot remain behind technologically. We have to embrace robotics in the manufacturing sector. Keep going. We have to protect the environment, absolutely. Then moving to the services sector, a key sector is the tourism sector. It's a foreign exchange earner. We have to resolve issues around, payments to airlines. All these blockages have to be unlocked so that we have more airlines flying into our resorts. We have to improve the quality of marketing, branding Zimbabwe and so forth. And then the digital economy, the banking sector and financial services, and then insurance, pensions, and then obviously improving the prospects of the external sector. Next slide, please. So just tourism to say more. You know what, there's a falls in Chimanimani. What's the name again? Do you know it? Mtaraz. Nyanga. I have to improve my geography. But how many people know about these falls? Is it advertised out there? I'm just highlighting that to say we have two interesting falls. There's Victoria Falls is famous, but we have another one. And I'm just saying this to highlight that we're not marketing enough on tourism. So I've actually determined to go and visit this falls and see it for myself, because even I've never seen it. But I know it's there. I'm just highlighting this. So rebranding Zimbabwe, marketing Zimbabwe is critical for the sector, but we have to play our part on the visa front, making sure that we open up. There are countries where you get your visa on arrival regardless of the country you come from, so that we don't have to be in bilateral agreements to allow others to come in just because they allow us to come into their countries. But visas on arrival is something that we have to work at to make sure that our tourists can come in easily. So we want to set up maybe a tourism fund to support the sector, because here is a sector that just earns us forex, without having to engage in manufacturing. All we need is good hotels, good marketing, and an airline that can get there, or at least a road that is, improves access. Making sure that the licensing for the sector is easy. It's easy to do. We'll do all of that. Thanks. Next one, the digital economy. This is one thing that I'm very passionate about as well. I'm going to dramatize and say we need a Silicon Harare. But what I mean by that is really making sure that with those incubators that can support our young people who like coding, who like to develop apps, or whatever they like to do. That's one thing we need to do. Other countries are already doing that. Again, I won't mention any countries, and I don't think in this position I want to do that. But make sure that in these incubators you've got mentors who mentor the youth. The research is also linked to universities. And so just making sure there's an ecosystem from universities to our coders, to the incubators, to the mentors, and then to the sources of capital. It's not difficult to create an iHub or a Silicon Harare. We want to roll out e-government systems. We're learning from other countries. And here I'm going to mention Estonia. I think I can do that safely. To say there's some things to learn from how they've done that. It should be the case that whenever a mother in a rural area in Mzarabane has come into a clinic and maybe we know that she's now expecting a baby, that information should be immediately transferred to a command center in Harare to say, we've one case of an extra Zimbabwean who will be born in the next 9 months. And it is that simple. Other countries are doing it. A simple SMS service for transmitting information is very easy to put together. That's part of e-government. Malaria cases. If a malaria case in some clinic somewhere in Chimanimani, we should know that there were 2 malaria cases that came through in a clinic yesterday, and that information is captured. I'm just using examples of what I know other countries are doing, and that's the digital economy. It's e-government, but I'm also passionate about youngsters being supported. They like to code. Next slide, please. The banking sector, again, at the risk of repeating, make sure there's a culture of savings and investment. We support the SME sector. I don't want to repeat that, but financial deepening is key. We're already saying that to the banks. They must recapitalize. They have a deadline of 2020. They're going to do that so that we have a robust banking sector that exudes confidence for you to put your monies in there, and depositors' funds are safe. Move on. Insurance and pensions. Again here, I'm calling for more innovation from the sector. We've said we're going to establish a pension fund for government. More innovations in the sector. We know that in terms of asset allocation, there is exposure, quite a bit of exposure to the property sector for a good reason, because in the hyperinflation environment that will come through, we know that they had to invest in property quite a bit, but at the same time, this creates illiquidity for their pension liabilities that they have to pay out to the pensioners, and thinking about ways to inject liquidity back, such as securitization. They ought to work on this, and perhaps by doing that, we are deepening capital markets, we are improving savings, but also solving an illiquidity problem for the pension sector. Yes, we know that there are some liabilities regarding the conversion of insurance and pension values from the Zim dollar to the US dollar, which is a legacy issue. We will sort it out and we will deal with this. Next one. Public infrastructure. Our infrastructure gap remains large, like most African countries. We'll continue to invest using PPPs directly as government, but also encouraging the private sector and private equity funds to do the same. And again, here, I want to make it clear that every large infrastructure project going forward, that for which we're looking for investors, should be advertised publicly within Zimbabwe and outside Zimbabwe. We are open for business. We want transparency. We want the best investors out there, best partners out there. I'm just going to highlight the progress we've made in Kariba South expansion, successfully completed with a capacity of 300 megawatts, and the progress being made in Wange Unit 7 and 8, a $1.5 billion project. The groundbreaking ceremony was in June 2018. We're making progress on this, and again, we'll pick up progress on, or rather progress will pick up on Wange 1 to 6 as we go forward. And that's another 300 million odd project, which we have other partners for that. The Batoga hydroelectric scheme, that's a very interesting project between Zimbabwe and Zambia through the Zambezi Water Authority, which we call on with Zambia. And that again is a power project. It's clean energy. The cost per kilowatt is lowest you can imagine. And here we're pleased that the partners are also the right kind of partners, sources of capital, the technology partners, and ourselves as government. I'm really looking forward to this project. And I'm hearing very interesting things about the project promoters on how eventually they could also try to crowd in ordinary Zimbabweans and Zambians as investors in the project, so that indeed they become truly a people's project that also deepen the savings culture. It's a BOT project, build, operate and transfer. That's what we've negotiated. Next slide, please. Water and sanitation. We have so many examples. I won't go into detail into all of them, but in the big Buruyadzo document, they are all detailed in here. If you want to go into that. Roads, dualization, Mutare, Harare, Gweru, Bulawayo roads, the Bay Bridge, Harare, Chirundi roads, dualization, Harare Ring Road. All of these are projects, road projects that will come to fruition. And as I to repeat, we should publicize them, make sure that we get the best partnerships out there. But also I must hasten to say that we also need to start thinking about smart infrastructure in the congested areas, because our strategy is also evolving. There's no reason why for some of the congested routes we cannot have cable cars. Have you thought about that? Cable car, it is cheaper than a road. You carry the same amount of number of people. It is greener. It is also a tourism facility. At weekends we could even charge more because we go everywhere. So you pay extra for that. And so this is not a pipe dream. I know what I'm talking about. I've done it before in my previous life in a country, again, that will remain unmentioned. It's doable, and there are certain routes that I see where we say, monorail, but cable car could also work, but I need a constant supply of electricity because I don't want you to be stuck up there in a capsule and then there's no power. So I'm dramatizing, but smart infrastructure is doable and it is not too expensive. There are so many other roads, without going into detail, please press on. The housing sector, you know what? If we want to create a middle class, one of the ways is to target what I call the household balance sheet. Ufumi wako as an individual is key to make sure that you're out of poverty. Most of them don't put out of poverty, so it's okay. But you move to the next level. So one way to do it is to focus on housing, urban housing. But because that is what is a household's balance sheet. Housing ownership is very, very critical for moving people into the middle class, the economy into the middle class economy, and people stay there. They don't fall back into poverty. So housing is critical in our infrastructure agenda. It is also social infrastructure agenda. We'll do all we can to make sure that the housing ownership goes up. That's one way to deal with the middle class. I spent a lot of time studying the dynamics of the middle class in Zimbabwe and Africa, and I know housing is key, among other factors, but I'll leave the other factors for another day. Next slide, please. Human development, education, and health. So on education, Zimbabwe is fantastic with academic education, absolutely. But we need the skills component. When I speak to the Minister of Higher Education, he's actually said that this is the issue. But I know that some of the first degrees have already been transformed, where they're now 4-year degrees with 1 year of internship. I like that. And making sure that they crowd in the private sector in the education process. The learners or the people or the students get some practical skills. In fact, in some countries, the academic route is only done by 20% of the people trying to get to university. 80% go through a vocational route with the skills acquisition. While they are working, they do a degree at the same time as a model. So then you have now a partnership between government, between the private sector in terms of internships, and then the university as the certificating institution. I'm pleased that we now have a national qualification framework, an NQF, which is very, very clear. That's also part of the reforms that the Ministry of Higher Education has done, and I like that. Moving on to the health sector, again here, access to health for all is critically important. We need healthy citizens, making sure that hospital beds are there, there's access to medicines and so forth, and drugs. Right now we know there's a drug shortage, so we need to deal with that. But also, we also know that people are going to other countries to seek medical attention. And that we need to find a way of making sure that our own health infrastructure and services comes up. On empowerment, gender equity is very, very important. This is not activism, it is real. Let me tell you what, globally and in Zimbabwe, companies where there is a higher number of female directors, those companies perform at least 35% above those that have fewer women at the board level. This is scientific evidence. Why? Because it seems that that gender balance with more women at the board level creates a stronger internal governance mechanism. That's the scientific evidence that we have. So, and I'm just using that, just that one example. Also, we know that in micro-lending, in development economics and all of that, if you give more development aid to women, they usually use it better than their counterparts who remain unmentioned. So I'm emphasizing this is very, very important that gender equity empowerment is focused on. There are countries where they actually insist that there should be more parliamentarians, female parliamentarians than males. Again, for the same reasons I have given. Next slide, please. Governance reforms. Next slide, please. So, rule of law, political governance, democratization, respect for rights and property rights. I'm repeating, I mentioned all of this. But I want to say one thing. Legislation such as POSA and IPA will be reformed, if not removed in future, so that we really open up the democratic space and show that we've opened up democratic space and freedom of expression. I'm delighted with the progress that is going to be made on those two pieces of legislations. Next slide, please. Yeah, so finally, monitoring and evaluation. All that I've spoken about, some of you are looking very tired already, will be monitored, there'll be monitoring mechanism based on the results, based on framework, high level. There'll be a steering committee which will be led through this ministry in cooperation with the President's office, OPC, then a technical committee for the technical detail. And so there'll be oversight. There's an oversight structure for the program so that we achieve what we want to achieve between now and December 2020. And it will be granular. Every department of government will have specific issues with timelines, costing, who's doing what, and who's going to be held accountable. Someone will be held accountable for this kind of delivery because we want to be able to deliver. Next slide, please. I thank you. Time for Q&A.
Yes.
I'll let
That's
Secretary and Kunaga lead. And it's time for me to rest so they answer the questions.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for taking us through the TSP. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, this is dissemination. And there's a document that many of you is going to get a copy of. And this is the document the Minister has just disseminated. Like he says, he's free to get your questions, and I'm sure if we go to up to 5, that will be servers for the day. Please state your name and organization. Sir.
Yeah, let's take 3 at a time. Yeah?
3 at 10.
Good. How are we doing for time?
My name is Privilege, Deutsche Welle. Just to draw you back, the introduction of the 2 cents per dollar for the electronic transfer has kind of caused some discomfort in the citizen. Maybe hypothetically, if you look at the previous 5 cents that you said you have changed, for transactions maybe of $1,000, 4 transactions of $1,000, one would pay tax of 20 cents, and now it is shot up to about $80. Some are referring now to the government, and yourself is insensitive and heartless. How would you respond to this?
Oh, I'm a very sensitive person. Certainly not heartless, but I'm also pragmatic. I think that, let's be honest, colleagues, we need to stop the bleeding. I'm faced with a bleeding patient. We stop the bleeding, and this is one way to do that. Secondly, we cannot do this without pain. My view is that the more pain we take at the beginning, in the first year or two, after that we stabilize our macroeconomy. After that, we will all be happy that we took the pain together as a nation at this stage, and we go forward. Let me say this. People don't realize that they are already indirectly paying for the weak economy that we are faced with. It's not direct, it's indirect. All we are doing now is together fixing it by doing some sacrifice to do that. That's what we are doing. So that as a preamble is how I think about this. But secondly, it's true that the economy has been informalized, but also, but thanks to the mobile telephony companies and the banking sector, that has been deepening on the use of electronic money. So you find that measures that were effective before in broadening the tax base are no longer effective. So we have to come up with new measures for that, and this is one new measure. Clearly, thirdly, the previous tax arrangement was regressive, because at the higher end, you know that people were paying very, very little in terms of size of transactions. So this is introducing some fairness, and I think that is welcome. Finally, we're going to cap the payment at the higher end. We're actually fine-tuning the cap on that, also fine-tuning some exemptions on that, but we'll let you know on that. But in my view, this is really one way where together as a nation we can fix our problems, and I need all hands on deck to do that. So that's why this tax really applies to everybody. It's individuals, it's companies, it's the whole nation. As we transact, that's what we're going to be doing and paying. But of course, we have leeway in future, maybe during the budget time, to fine-tune and see how we can, let me use the word fine-tune. I nearly said something else. Otherwise, then I commit myself. But also look at other countries, which again, Charles Ramona mentioned. There's a country that is currently charging, is it 12 plus 15%? 15% on transactions. And also there's another country which charged 2%, and here now they've reduced to 1%. That's in Africa again. I mean, that is the norm. That is the norm. I know it is a shock to people, but we do need austerity now, and we need to fix our country together. I will do my part. Government will do its part to control expenditure and also be more accountable as to where your taxes are going. It should be in another 4-month secretary. We should be able to show Guti Maria Taka collector from the 2%. We've bought so many hospital beds so that our clinics have hospital beds. We've bought so many desks so that our pupils, our children, have desks in the schools across the Zimbabwe. So tangible things that impact ordinary people, we have to show that. I've even agreed with the secretary that maybe it's even worth ring-fencing a portion of this tax to do that, to show that we are sensitive, just to make sure that you withdraw this charge of insensitivity. But I actually mean it. I'm actually someone who always means well, by the way. Now, the other things like, you see our SMEs, people call them hawkers and all manner of names, trading their ways under plastics and so forth. Really, we could do better and build them decent stalls that way they can sell their ways. Things that really touch on ordinary people. In my view, if we can do that, that's really one way of justifying what we've done by asking everyone to contribute to this endeavor to fix the economy.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Next.
Other questions other than text? Thank you.
Okay. My name is Debson Mandela from ZBC.
Thanks, Mandela.
Yeah, sure. While it is commendable that they want to increase the tax base for the country, many people are worried that what are you doing to the government expenditure? It is good that you've launched the economic transitional program.
Yes.
But now, the government expenditure has been turning the flesh for the Zimbabwean economy in the past, with also domestic borrowing, ballooning. What are you going to do in that regard? The implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, we've seen some economic blueprints being issued to the public, but nothing materialized.
Thank you for that question. So that's the next stage now, is to deal with expenditure control on the government side. Absolutely. So we've done the broadening of the tax base. Those are revenue measures. We will fine tune, as I explained, put a cap, reduce the pain, show results, and then we move on to expenditure control. You mentioned the issue of ballooning domestic debt. We're already dealing with that. Secretary tells me yesterday he rejected a request for issuance of some treasury bills for some activity which will remain unmentioned, and we insisted that what we should do, we're happy to offer a guarantee provided that request could be sent to a financial institution. We then guarantee that institution. But that institution, before they call on the guarantee, must demonstrate best effort in having tried to collect. Then we can assist with that. Now, moving, Secretary Ed, please.
I think if I might add, in terms of how we are controlling expenditure. Look, we do have very strong frameworks within government, really, to manage and control expenditure. And I think we have been pushing back now as Treasury on anything that we believe to be unjustified expenditure. And the Minister mentioned, and I've already made a proposal, that out of this new tax that we are collecting, it is our intention actually to ring-fence a certain portion of that money, which we will direct to social services, mostly within the marginalized areas, focusing mostly on health and education. We will expand to other areas, really, of our responsibilities as government. But I think as soon as we start collecting this money, you will see roads in Mabvuku, and I'm saying it, and you can quote me, you will see roads in Mabvuku being fixed, you will see roads in Kuwadzana being fixed. Of course, you will also see roads in Kabuzuma being fixed. But look, this is a commitment that we are making, that we are not just going to collect this money so that it goes into travel and subsistence here in government, so that it goes into purchase of motor vehicles here in government. My minister and I have actually even been having conversations about purchase of motor vehicles to say, should we maintain the same type of vehicles that have been purchased in the past? And we are also making recommendations to government to say, maybe we should not be driving these top-level vehicles, and there might be an opportunity to lower the type of vehicles that we buy. We are also even looking at saying, do we need the number of vehicles that we have bought in the past? So there have been submissions that we've made, which we have pushed back and say, look, are we supposed to buy the same number of vehicles that we used to buy in the past? And my minister and I are thinking that we should not be doing that. So we are also engaging and looking at options to control expenditure. But I think when we launched the monetary policy statement and the minister's measures on Monday, we promised transparency. And this is what we will assure you, that we will come back to you more regularly, more frequently, to tell you how much we've collected, how much we have spent, where we spent it, and how we spent it, and all the other measures that we are now starting to make to ensure that the expenditure is also controlled, and to ensure that we start spending the money on more important social activities.
Thank you very much. You satisfied? I think to emphasize that on the issue of the wage bill as well, we just emphasize that we're going to do something about that, and the skills mix in the public service, the size of the public service, all of that we're going to do in addition to what the Secretary has mentioned. We're determined to make sure this time around it happens. I wanted to add something. Kunaka was just reminding me that there's a point I need to emphasize, that just to make my point about the economy being bigger, actually, And even this, I still think is an under-measurement. The official GDP, we've always said, is 18 billion as of this year. But actually it's bigger. It is 25.8 billion. So our economy is bigger than we think. It also means that our per capita income is not what we thought. It is, our per capita income is of the order of 1,500 in terms of GDP per capita. Yeah, this means that we are even as things are, as my colleague was saying, things being tough as they are, we can see that this middle income status is achievable. It means that we're already technically at a lower middle income country status. We're no longer a poor country, a low income country. Actually, that's the phrase, low income country, but already lower middle income. And it should be easier for us to get to upper middle income. So to repeat, the current GDP that is was always being flighted was 18 billion, but actually the true one is about 25.8 billion. This is 2018. For 2019, we expect it to be at 29 billion. I'm rounding off. For 2020, we expect it to be at 32.8 billion. So I wanted to say this again. The economy is bigger than we thought. I still think that this is an under-measurement given the formalization of the economy, but this is what we can measure. The issue of rebasing our GDP, by the way, is not new. We've done that in the past, many times, 3 times in the past. When we do it Zimstats, working with our colleagues at the African Development Bank, at the IMF, at the World Bank. There are certain global standards we have to comply with, and from time to time you have to rebase. Yeah. Other countries have just done that. You can Google. This is not new at all. I wanted to make that that clear.
And if I may add, actually, Zimstats actually published the new rebased GDP figures yesterday. So if you can access Zimstats website, you will actually get the new numbers of our GDP.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. If I may pick on a lady. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Having come all the way from Mthuli.
Me or you?
Myself,
Oh, right.
all the way from North, Bulawayo and North, because we are so concerned about the reaction that has taken place due to the fiscal announcement. I will not delve much on the text, though it comes in as well. I'm more concerned with the construction industry, which I play in.
Right.
The construction industry is hard hit to the point the poor dead will remain dead and the rich dead will remain up there unless some urgent measures are put in place for the manufacturers of cement to be considerate. The cement manufacturers are demanding 40% in US dollar, and I am a middle SME who's into finishing a factory in concrete products manufacturing, which I'm competing with big players like Eugene, Zimtile, and the rest. So you find because I'm middle, I will remain dead and closed. Effective the first I've already closed because I can't afford the 40% US dollar in demand. And I have had to stop. The employees are stuck, and you come to the consortium of Brick Molders Association. Bulawayo is thriving, Bubi, Lupan, and Binga is thriving with infrastructure development in terms of schools. I've already taken monies from schools that expect me to construct the classrooms, but I cannot go.
You can't
forward.
deliver. Yeah.
I can't deliver anymore because one, the FCA account, I cannot fund it. The bond is different in treatment. There is no fairness there between the bond and the FCA in terms of treatment. And also, my key supplier for cement is demanding the US dollar. So at the end of the day, I remain down and closed. And the families are suffering already. And the last one, we have been formalized as SMEs, but you are talking about only a few of the formalized. There is a lot of informal SME that is running and enjoying more funds because they demand cash, no one is following up. Am I being taxed 2% for paying the tax again? because I'm paying a lot of these other taxes. When that one has no tax, has no machine, has no eco-cash but cash. Then we have lastly, all companies demanding US dollar. You go to Pump and Steel, you go to Africa Steel, because I need to roof the classrooms, we need to roof the homes, they are demanding US dollar cash. We can't afford that. We have the Pakistanis who are running the steel manufacturing. They are all demanding the same. But here is a domestic, a GDI which we were talking about, who's striving to come up, and because of the policies and being stifled, is that openness to business.
Secretary, you want to tackle that? Very eloquent.
Yeah. Look, I think at the end of the day, what we have to understand are actually supposed to address those distortions. But we also have to admit that some of the distortions cannot and will not be addressed overnight. We have to take it a step at a time. There might be specific issues which we might need to take offline so that we can see how they can be addressed. But what we are trying to do by launching this program is to start to deal with those distortions. The 2 cents that we are mourning about is also supposed to deal with those distortions. But I think we have to be honest and say there will be a little bit of pain as we try to redress the challenges and the structural challenges that we've had over the years. But on the specifics on who is demanding what form of payment, look, I think that we can take offline and discuss the specifics.
Yes. And then also just given that the construction sector in our figures was showing a lot of promise, I think it's important that we look into that sector which you're involved in. Also, of course, you're a supplier, in this, or rather, it's the cement producers who are supplying you, and this 40% forex requirement, and we have a shortage of forex, and you can't even effect the FCA account opportunity that has been given to you because you have half closed. We'll look at all those things, but more broadly, just look at the construction sector, because clearly it is an opportunity as a growth sector for the economy. I think we'll pick that offline, I think, the Secretary says. But thank you for your eloquence in articulating the issues.
Thank you. I think I should take the last 2. Yeah. I'm also sensitive to the program, Honourable Minister. Yes, yeah. Quickly, please. No narrative. Just get to your point.
Okay.
I apologize. I won't be able to answer one
Yes.
because I've got the next meeting. I really apologize.
No, that's fine, Minister. Maybe you could just give us a bit of details on what you mean by right-sizing the public service. What are you going to do about that?
Right sizing means obviously means letting people off, those who are due for retirement in the first place, those who are not correctly positioned in their positions, but also bring in new skills, making sure that those who need to be retained are retained and incentivized to stay. So that's what you really mean by right sizing, making sure that we cut the cloth the right way. We're going to do that. And it's not easy, by the way, for government, for any company. If you are involved with any company, which you are, trying to restructure your workforce is never easy. It's painful, it's emotional, and can be a traumatic process, but still necessary.
Ladies and gentlemen, help me appreciate the presentation by the Minister and dissemination of this document. He has excused himself. Thank you very much.
And get yourself a copy.
Yes, everyone is